is Fundraising Radio, and today's a guest speaker. We have Carey Ransom, founder and president at OC4 Venture Studio. And this episode will mainly talk about who should choose the venture studio, who is it actually built for, and how it operates. So, Carey, let's kick off by you giving us some background on yourself and on OC4 Venture Studio.
Sure, Konstantin. Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here. Quick background on me. I grew up in a family business that is really where I learned most of what I would characterize about business, people, leadership, and a lot of my core values, and have spent most of my career, I chose not to rejoin that. I spent most of my career as a serial startup operator and investor, and I've essentially had every imaginable job across every stage in a number of software companies. It's well into double figures. And what I've really done is put together all of those learnings, a lot of mistakes, a lot of experiments, some success, and tried to package that up to make it much more easily accessible and scalable with a number of early stage companies through a venture studio. And that's how we've really put OC4 together.
So generally, when I speak to people and ask them, when I usually explain them, what's my day job, and I work for a venture studio myself, and when I ask them, are you familiar with the concept of a venture studio? It's like 90 to 95% of them usually respond no. So let's start with the description of a venture studio. What is it?
Sure. So I think it's a really interesting term because it's sort of taken on its own life. And I think to some extent, we may fraction the concept of venture studio over time into a number of incarnations. So I tend to think of them as a couple different today. So you have this class called startup studios that is maybe within venture studio as well. And so the way I tend to think about it is you have one form that is idea centric, which is we have our own ideas. We really want to start and birth them from within this studio where we have everything we feel like we need within the studio to really get this started. And that's what I would almost characterize as a more idea-centric startup studio. We really look at ourselves as more of a company building company, and we use the term venture studio because that's at least somewhat known in the marketplace. But we look at what we do is we really are in the business of helping to build companies. We actually, though, look for founders who are committed to trying to start and build a company. And then we want to co-found or co-pilot with them with all of the resources that we have within our studio. And that includes capital that we're willing to invest, but also includes a whole team of people and capabilities that we're also willing to invest. And so we then get compensated through equity that we buy through either investing capital or through equity that we earn through the sweat and tears and time of our team that we're investing into the company. But it's a whole belief that we're in the business of helping to create companies, and therefore we are long-term equity owners alongside these founders that want to go create the maximum value from this company that we can.
Right. Yeah. Perfect description of the venture studio, and thanks for making sure that you define those two different types of venture studios. One that creates ideas internally, which I don't quite understand. Like, who does that? That's weird. And those that are good, like ours.
I try to not be critical of the others. I mean, there are some that have birthed some pretty amazing ideas, but I think some of those are probably an entrepreneur who maybe has multiple ideas at the same time.
Yeah.
It doesn't want to commit to one. So says, hey, I'll start this studio as a way to really push a few forward and see which one maybe has the most legs, and then I'll go focus on that. And I think that's been the reality for several of those very idea-centric studios.
Right.
But I'm a big believer in trying to add superpowers to the committed entrepreneur to greatly increase the likelihood of success. And I think what we're finding, and you probably as well, is there are certain entrepreneurs that really resonates with, and there are certain that it doesn't. And our view is there are many different ways to make a company, build a company. We just believe this is a way that can really be predictably more successful. And so for those who are open to that idea, those are the ones that we really look to partner with.
Right. So another question after I give you this, pitch of a venture studio and how it works, my next question, their next question is generally how is it different from an incubator or accelerator? So question is for founders, from the founder's standpoint, who should go to, a standard accelerator or an incubator versus who should go to the venture studio?
Sure, good, great question. And I think some of this is still to be determined. So I've met plenty of founders who've been in an incubator and through an accelerator and still doesn't really have what they need. And that's not to be critical of those. What I would say is it's really about, as early as you possibly can, determining where your strengths are, where your what I call area of genius is, and looking at the best ways to supplement that. And the best ways to supplement you toward key outcomes. And so I think you and I would probably both agree that one of the key early outcomes that you're trying to get to is this idea of product market fit. And if you can use an incubator to help you get there, that may be the way to do it. If an accelerator can help you get there, that may be the way to do it. In our case, we put just a lot more near term and long term resources into these companies on the goal to that outcome of early product market fit, that we think we can do it more cost effectively and more capitally efficient than many other means by which you could do it, and really try to set the company up for the ideal growth trajectory that they want to go on, which could then be fueled with the next round of funding. And so I look at it as it's as much a personality fit and values fit, as well as what you really need to supplement you and your early team in that journey.
Right. So let's look at it from the eyes of the founder who is like, okay, I have made some sort of research on the market. I feel like there is some sort of problem. I maybe already have a couple of small paying customers. What should specifically be the decisive factor of going to an incubator versus going to a venture studio besides, the gut feeling, or maybe I know someone at venture studio, I'll just go to him and or her and talk to them. So what's besides that, what should be the decisive factor, you think?
Sure. I mean, as I said, like I think it is about, is there alignment around the outcome, right? If I'm going to go to an incubator, what is it that I'm going to ultimately receive from them, and what is the outcome that I'm trying to achieve from there? Is it just that I'm trying to get a first version of a product developed, and beyond that, then I'm on my own? And if that's the case, then that may work. If the incubator can help me truly get to product market fit, then that may be a perfectly good fit. But I would be very I guess if I were the founder, I would want to deeply understand what is the goal, what is the outcome that I should be expecting to achieve by being in here. And in our case, we're really looking at how do we help you get there better, faster, cheaper. And if you are one third of what needs to be around an early company to get you to product market fit, then we want to provide those other two thirds. If you have all three legs of that stool to get there, you have product, you've got if we typically work in software centric businesses, so you've got product, you've got somebody who can actually build the product, and you've got really a sense of go to market strategy, and you're able to go through a disciplined process for getting there and really understanding where you can win in the market and getting early indications of that, then you probably don't need a venture studio. And we'll root for you and we'll cheer for you. And I think what we find is that most people are missing substantial elements, and we are one way to potentially supplement them on their way to getting to product market fit. Once they've gotten to that point, they're also in a place to get way better people into their organization. I think getting committed talent into the early stages of a company is a particularly difficult thing to do. And our view is we're going to provide way better capabilities than you're probably able to afford or know or can convince to get involved in the early stages where a lot is unproven, because we are people that love that journey of figuring it out.
Right, right. Yeah, perfect definition. Love it. And next question is about who, I mean, next question that I don't get asked that often because it's just not very polite, but that people think about is, what's the major downside of venture studio? Because
Sure.
the many venture studios take like a huge chunk of the company, like some I've seen doing 30%.
Mhm.
Uh, and just it's a lot to give out on this early stage.
Sure.
What do you think is the major downside of a venture studio?
So I think one of the potential downsides is that equity split. If that is really uncomfortable, we don't tend to take that significant of an equity position. We really will line up the amount of sweat equity that we expect based on how much work and how much resource we need to really put in to supplement the founder or founding team. So it's based really on a more, I think, practical approach. And if we're really doing everything, then obviously we're going to ask for more. But we also will put capital into the business as well as a traditional capital investor would, right? So we'll invest in multiple ways. But I think the one downside potentially is that if people are uncomfortable with it. The other, I would say, which is the bigger downside, if you perceive it to be a downside, is you are going to have true partners who want to have tremendous amount of involvement and influence in your business. And the way I always describe it to founders, I say, look, I'm not trying to run your business. I'm not trying to take control. I'm trying to create a really disciplined, honest approach to decision making that
Hmm.
means any one of us could be right. We want to get to the best possible answer. And if you feel like you have to go figure all this out yourself, you need to make every decision yourself, and that is what you really want to build as a company, that's your choice. But you absolutely should not be working with us as a venture studio, because we want to be deeply involved, because our belief is that you're going to get better outcomes through a well functioning, deeply committed team. And we want to help you understand that on the way to truly becoming the great leader of an organization that we believe by getting involved that you can become. And so I look at that as a self reflection, self awareness. It could be viewed as a downside if that's not what you want.
Right. Yeah, that's actually true, and that's perfect description of venture studio is just like a pretty big and super active partner.
That's
So
right.
it's a really good thing to review. Before you jump into that thing, you need to understand that there will be a lot of actual like heavy input from the venture studio point.
Mhm.
So let's talk about deal sourcing. How do you find those companies that you want to help out? How do you find those early stage entrepreneurs that are a good fit for yourself?
Sure. So we are very active in every possible way where early stage founders are around hanging out. So whether that is events when there used to be in-person events, if you can think back to those days, um,
Right.
we actively are working with others in the ecosystem, whether that is attorneys or other folks that would work with early stage startups. We talk to a lot of venture firms that we're partnered with to say, hey, you may be seeing things that have something missing or that are too early for you. Maybe we can get involved, help get it to a place where then you'd have interest. So we really work across the ecosystem. I've been in the startup world for well over 20 years, so I have a lot of relationships and am fairly well networked into the startup community. And so a lot of people send us founders. Just we spend a lot of time, and as we say to them, hey, even if we're not a great fit, we're going to at least share some thoughts, and we'll happily introduce you to others who might be a better fit. We don't try to pretend that we're for everyone. We try to be really clear because this is a very long-term embedded relationship that we're entering into. And so we need to all be eyes wide open and careful about making sure this is a great fit. So we do need to meet with a lot of people to really find those that resonate on both sides.
Speaking of a good fit, I actually forgot to ask you one of my standard questions in the beginning. What do you generally invest in? So are you some field focused or are you generalist investors?
Sure. So I would call us somewhere between. We are, we really have a process that we like to adhere to that's very product centric, but we love businesses where software and data intersect, and that can look pretty broad, but there are a lot of common thought and operating processes that you can implement in a business that has a really data centric software core to it. But we're right now about 50% business to consumer, 50% B2B. We probably prefer B2B, but when we see a really compelling software product that can be built with a strong data strategy to it, that's where we really start.
Got it. So let's go back a little bit towards the accelerators and incubators. So one of the reasons why people want to go there is because of those demo days. Most accelerators and incubators claim that, if you last for the whole program, if you stay there, if you work hard, at the end, you'll get a chance to present in front of great investors. And sometimes that's true, but sometimes we'll not get into that.
Sure.
I can be really critical of those demo days. But does a venture studio has something like a demo day or something similar?
Very good question. So we actually did in the early days, we did a somewhat of a demo day type uh, presentation, somewhat to just introduce our companies to the network, and so and we had great reception to it. So I think we will come up with some kind of similar structure again. So we experimented with one where we had 7 companies present, which is kind of like a demo day. And I think we
Yeah.
will do that again because the feedback was very positive. I'd say the one difference is we do not have a set in stone program with specific timelines. This is a very rolling situation. And so we are out setting up demo opportunities, if you will, for our companies all the time with different investors that are in our network to try to help them by showing that this is a company that we're deeply involved with. Here's the traction that they're getting. We'd love to have you get involved at the right time. So it's really an ongoing effort that we are undertaking all the time. So it doesn't naturally line up like a program based acceleration program does, to just naturally have a group of companies all at the same place and all at the same time, given what we do.
Hmm.
And so we're trying to figure out what the right output looks like. But even just doing a showcase of our venture studio companies, which is more like what we did previously, we found does have some value and merit. So I think we'll continue to do things like that.
Sounds good. Yeah, next time you showcase it, I want to see.
Sounds good.
But next question is the advice to those early stage founders who are most of my listeners are pre-seed stage / seed stage. And what's your advice to them in terms of fundraising? Those people who are thinking if they need to go to venture studio, if they want to go to an incubator, accelerator, angel investors, maybe grant funding, or maybe just bootstrap. What's your advice to them? How should they make up their mind?
Sure. I mean, I think you really want to understand the journey that you're about to embark on. And if you really see and believe that you are on a path to something that has that kind of, high growth, $100 million plus type of opportunity, and then you really need to start to think about what are the investors at those early first couple stages that can be those critical partners to help me through that. And if you have not been through it yourself as either part of a company or having done this before, then I would strongly encourage you to find people who can help guide you on that journey, or else you're going to just run into a lot of
Hmm.
challenges on the way. You're going to run into the challenges of a lot of mistakes that you can make, and ultimately a lot of those you can recover from, but they will waste time, they will waste money, they'll probably lead to some casualties along the way of people who may eject out in various ways. But those are things that many of those are preventable by getting the right partners around you. And then the other is you're going to end up with a lot of no's through the process from people who just don't want to be that first person to make a bet on you. And that's just the reality. And the majority of investors that are out there are what I would call pickers, which are they're looking for something that is likely to succeed with or without their involvement. And they want to pick ones that it's sort of the laziness that a lot of us probably have, but they want to pick ones that they can feel good that they picked, but they don't really have to do very much. And I think from our perspective, we feel like we want to do a lot. And so we still are choosing people. We are, but we're choosing people that we get to really work closely with. And that's part of what really gets us excited, which is why we set this up as a venture studio instead of going and just being a picker and a more
Right.
passive investor. And so I think it's really understanding who the different types of people are out there and finding the ones that really align with who you are as an entrepreneur and the journey that you're likely to undertake. And so there are a lot of different ways to build a company. Venture capital is a really expensive way to do it and an expensive type of money. And so if there are other mechanisms like grants or other ways bootstrap to potentially fund it, I'm never one to criticize that. And I mean, part of what I said at the beginning, I grew up in a family owned business that lasted for almost 150 years. So we owned
Nice.
it. We never took somebody else's money to give ownership away in that whole time. And so I'm certainly attuned to that as another way to build a company. And frankly, there aren't that many that have lasted that long. So
That's
that's it.
true.
Yes.
That's true. There are not that many 150-year-old companies, so nice, nice work there. And yeah, great advice in terms of find entrepreneurs who have already gone through this field. Just search on Crunchbase someone in your field who has gone through an exit. Cold email them asking like, hey, I'm just in the same exact position you were 10 years ago. Do you mind helping me? Most likely, they will not mind helping you. So
Mhm.
do that, but be respectful for their time and all that stuff. So last question here, call to action. What's the one thing you want the listener to do as soon as the episode is over?
So if you're an entrepreneur, I think it is that find a way to do an honest evaluation of who you are, where you are, and what you really are trying to achieve with this endeavor. Is this about a true mission and calling that you have to go solve this problem in the world? Is this just a mechanism for you to seek fame and fortune? All of those are perfectly fine. I think it's just critical for people's self-awareness is a big term that I think is so helpful to people to try to achieve. And it's something that I think we constantly should be trying to do and finding ways to have others help us with that, to help identify our blind spots. So taking that stock, doing that honest evaluation in some way or ways to really get clear, because then that will help you determine your best paths forward from there.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of self-criticism, self-awareness, and all that self-analysis. But in this case, it's really important. You need to understand if that's something you can do for 5, 10 years. And here I'm gonna say, yeah, do some self-analysis. At this point, it's all right. And my personal call to action is usually go to the description of this episode. I'll leave the link to OC4 Venture Studio. So if you have after this episode considering more joining like venture studio rather than an incubator, go on and check out the description of this episode. You'll find everything there and have a great day.